So buenas tardes, good evening. My name is Berenice Núñez Constant, and I have the pleasure of serving as the board chair for the Children's Partnership. First, my job number one is to welcome all of you here tonight. It's been quite a month, this last month, so congratulations to all of us for making it here tonight, especially in LA. And especially those of you that came from far to be with us tonight. This is the culminating event of the Children's Partnerships for Our Children's Future 30th Anniversary Speaker Series. It's been a year, a fabulous year of speakers and events and rooftops and different convenings, panels, and it's been really amazing to be part of that whole journey in celebrating TCP's 30 years. Of course, we do this because we're thinking of our children, but we're thinking and celebrating these last 30 years, but of course we're thinking of what's ahead for us. We have partnership in our name for a reason. We know that we did not achieve our successes by ourselves. In fact, most folks who are successful obviously have fabulous partners and friends with them. And we also know that we cannot face challenges and really do not want to face challenges alone. Our strength comes from partnerships with amazing community organizations, healthcare providers, policymakers, and advocates like the people in this room. So thank you for being part of our village and our familia. And to the spirit of having wonderful partners, you also want partners in your corner that support the work that you do, right? And so I want to send out some special shout outs and thanks to partners and champions that are with us tonight, because without their support, none of this would be possible, and we wouldn't have the privilege of really thinking beyond next year, but really into the next decade, which is the work that we're really planning for. And so thank you to the California Healthcare Foundation, HealthNet, First 5 LA, Kaiser Permanente, and Ultimate Health Services, my own organization. Let's give us a round of applause. Of course, there are many, many, many other supporters to count, other generous sponsors, and so if you have supported us along the way for this past year, thank you so much. Their names are on the screen here tonight. I want to also extend a special note of appreciation to my fellow wonderful board members at the Children's Partnership. We have James Perez. Who else is here? Where am I? Well, wave my wonderful board members. It's really an amazing board. We all do this because we have the love for the work, for the children, and it's really a pleasure to serve alongside all of them and really learn from each other. But I also want to thank founders like Lori Leiper and Wendy Lazarus. Wendy, I knew you were someone special when I walked in tonight. You know, we locked eyes. We were talking about that earlier. But thank you for being with us today and really for your commitment. And of course, Sherry Davis, who's here with us as well, for your commitment to really starting this organization. So I personally hope we're making you proud and we're making your, moonshot dreams come true. Wendy and Lori founded TCP in 1993 as a different kind of children's organization, an organization that sought to set a children's agenda on emerging issues. We started with the first of its kind research about how the internet could affect children, and our work has only grown since then. We use a community-driven approach to establish our policy priorities, and we are excited to lean more heavily into this commitment. Through strong multi-sector and multiracial partnerships in recent years, this has included convening community health workers and promotores, mostly women of color, for listening sessions in English and Spanish, resulting in a policy brief and in partnership with some of these women and incredible advocates, many of which are in the room with us tonight. In 2022, TCP helped win funding for community health workers to provide preventive services in California, in our Medicaid program, which help families of color access health care. During COVID-19, we worked with the National Black Women's Justice Institute to establish a youth-led policy council with support from adult allies and with leadership of youth partners to advance their policy solutions. And this resulted in winning an $8 million investment from the state for peer-to-peer youth mental health programs in high schools. I mean, when we talk about this work, it really is about equity, health equity, child equity. It is about bringing those resources forward, and that's monumental, so congratulations to the team. We are honored now to be administering that work and to have recently announced those 8 high schools located across the state. A year ago, we also commissioned Lake Research Partners to conduct 22 focus groups with 165 participants, including parents, guardians of children of color, and Medi-Cal enrollment assisters to share their experience on what it means to be without insurance coverage and to renew Medi-Cal coverage. We then used what we learned from our community members, truly community informed, to inform our 2024 policy priorities. Parents repeatedly identified wait times in the county call centers as a challenge, so we responded, and we then championed a bill to set new standards for the county call center wait times and require the results to be publicly posted by Governor Newsom. So Governor Newsom signed this bill into law just a few weeks ago. So now we're establishing laws and changing the game on that front. We all know that those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution, and our work is better because of our community partners. Thank you all for joining us this evening to celebrate these steps forward and commitment, and really the 30 years that the Children's Partnership has been here. We will keep growing and innovating and contributing to the children of California. And so with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce my amiga, TCP's President Mayra Alvarez.
Thank you, Bere, so much for that introduction. There's like a step here, and I'm like, oh, should I get on it? Like is it meant for short people? I should, okay. In my head, I'm taller than I really am. I also want to just extend a deep appreciation to Bere for her leadership and her guidance and really her true friendship on this journey. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will also give a plug and a deep appreciation to this evening's sponsor for helping make tonight's event possible, but also for the partnership on our shared work for children. Thank you so much for your support. We're in this together. And really to everyone in this room today, I want to echo Bere's thank you for being a part of our village. I said this at our kickoff event last year, but again, one of my ways of being is a quote that my mom taught us growing up, and my tías every day. It was, dime con quién andas y te digo quién eres. Tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. This is who we're with. We're in this work together, and we're so proud to be in this work with you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you that are maybe new to the Children's Partnership, there's a couple folks in this room, and we welcome you with open arms. We're a team of incredible advocates for children that deeply believes that community input must guide our work, that families do not lead single-issue lives, and therefore our work must be intersectional, and that not one of us is getting anywhere alone, and that it's through partnerships and coalitions that we build community power for children and young people, and that we can multiply that power for change. We celebrate the past, and we get re-energized for the future because of the community with whom we do this work. A key element of our community is our team. So I want to thank the great members of the Children's Partnership team. If you could just stand up and say hello, wave your beautiful selves, yeah? Thank you so much for everything that went into creating this evening, making it successful, and more importantly, for the work that y'all are doing every day. Before we begin our discussion tonight, we want to take a moment to recognize a specific team member, someone who's been part of TCP's community for over 2 decades, and has been with me since I started at my journey at TCP. And that's Kristen Golden Texta, our outgoing Health Policy Director. I want to say thank you, Kristen, for your unyielding dedication to making our healthcare system better, more effective, more just for every child. Thank you, Kristen, for your boundless compassion, your beautiful heart, and your kind soul. As an advocate, a colleague, and a friend, I am a stronger advocate for children because of your guidance, your support, and your inspiration. For a special tribute, I want to invite our founder, Wendy Lazarus, to the stage, and the woman who hired Kristen over 2 decades ago to speak a few words about our amazing colleague.
Coming up tall, too. Well, this is a plum job that I got, to talk a little bit about my friend Kristen. But I have to start by just saying at this final event of TCP's 30th that you all on the board and on the staff and Mayra at the helm are doing such phenomenal work. And when we started this little bitty organization 30 years ago and didn't even have money to pay ourselves, it is just so inspiring to see what you all are accomplishing. Not just what you're taking on, but you're getting this stuff done. So thank you. Thank you. And now to my friend Kristen, who I think most people in the room know, but I want to just talk a little bit more about Kristen as a full person, because I feel like one of the luckiest people on earth that I got to work with her for so many years. We first met 24 years ago when I was co-leading with Lori Lipper, the Children's Partnership. Kristen, at that point, was working for the California Secretary of Health and Human Services. That was late 2000. If I remember right, it was Peter Harbidge who talked to me about you, Kristen, and said, you need to hire Kristen. She's usually the one with the best ideas in the room. And that is so, so true. But I had the reaction that probably other advocates would have, which is, well, how do we know she's jibbed right to be an advocate? She's just been working on the Hill, and she's been in state government. But the rest is history. Besides being the longest serving Children's Partnership staff person at 23 years, Kristen is really a unicorn. Really, really, really. As a leader on kids' health policy in California and federally, and if you look at the details, as a key strategist on pretty much every big advance that's ever happened in the kids' health space in California. When I think about Kristen and how she's made these things happen, there are 2 qualities that, to me, really are Kristen. One is her creative instincts. Outside the box is an awful overused term, but that's what Kristen does. And the other is her resilience. She does not stop. She doesn't give up until the job's done. And one example, which I think some of you in the room are probably part of, is you may know that the Children's Partnership, working with many, many partners, worked for 10 years before we actually got health coverage for all children in California. And that was regardless of immigration status, and proudly then California covered their parents. But at each of the times that we lost, and there were so many of them, Kristen was the first person to say, well, let's try this next thing. So, just to give you a little idea, we started with pilots that were children's health initiatives that some of you may know. And then we tried to get those funded statewide. It didn't work out well. And then we turned it into policy legislation, but that was vetoed because there wasn't money for it. And then we went to the ballot to get funding for undocumented kids through a cigarette tax. We're badly outspent and came pretty close, but we didn't win that. And then it was with all that great groundwork laid and organizing and joining forces with groups representing immigrant families that we finally, all of us together, won this huge, huge advance. For kids in the summer of 2015, when Jerry Brown brokered a budget that opened the door for 170,000 undocumented kids to get coverage. And Kristen is one of the unsung heroes of that. But she's applied that same kind of creativity and relentlessness to the Healthy Families Program, Covered California, making Medi-Cal enrollment simpler, and so many other things. But one of my favorite parts of Kristen's magic is her unique ability to tap into her long-standing relationships in Washington, D.C. And the way she would do this to sort of pressure or maybe motivate California officials to do what was right for kids. I'm not going to call out any specific examples here because I don't want to bust anybody. But similarly, when federal issues came up that affected California, people call Kristen. What are we going to do? And who do we need to talk to in DC? And I want to sort of close by saying, Kristen, it might not feel this way to you, but you are also a model to many of us in terms of a work-life balance and having great experiences outside of work. I might just start with living on a houseboat, getting a fellowship to spend 8 months in Sydney, Australia, because she needed to learn about their health coverage system there. The beautiful scarves that Mayra mentioned, and maybe she's even going to take up painting. But most important is what an amazing mom Kristen is to Weka and Willow, and a spouse to Matt. So the sort of final point is, and all of you who've worked with Kristen, I think would join in this chorus, she's one of the warmest and most lovely human beings on earth, period. So we can't wait to see, Kristen, what you choose next to make your difference. And in the meantime, I join Mayra in just thanking you on behalf of so many young people and their parents nationwide, but over so many years, the kids in California. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kristen and Wendy. So appreciate that. And again, Kristen, I joke around with you. We're never really going to let you go. So looking forward to Any updates you got to share? Alongside you, we celebrate again these 30 years of advocacy for children, but more importantly, we're excited about what these next 30 years are going to look like. Tonight, everyone in this room, we're together recommitting to the work ahead, work that will be especially challenging as we consider the political divisions in which children are raised today, but filled with opportunities when we know how it is when we work together. As we consider the next 30 years, I want to bring our amazing panelists to the stage and consider those opportunities within the context of our multiracial democracy. First, we have Shimica Gaskins, President and CEO of Grace and End Child Poverty California. Shimica has worked in law and public policy, specializing in legislative, regulatory, and policy issues associated with criminal justice reform and children's rights. She's also been an incredible friend and a peer mentor in my journey as an organizational leader. Next, we have Priscilla Huang. After building an advocacy career in Washington, D.C., Priscilla became the founding executive director of the Center for Asian Americans in Action, a nonprofit organization that conducts policy analysis, engages in policy advocacy, and strengthens capacity for CBOs to build a more equitable society for Asian Americans in Orange County and beyond. She was also one of my first colleagues in Washington, D.C., and welcomed me with open arms. And finally, we have Virginia Hedrick, Executive Director for the California Consortium for Urban Indian Health. She's built an extensive career in public health, advocating for racial justice and indigenous communities, and is an enrolled member of the Yurok tribe of California and also of Karuk descent. She's also someone that carries herself with grace and passion every day, and when you hear her speak, you're gonna know why we invited her up here. So I'm gonna start with the conversation for tonight. So again, I'm gonna start with the question that's probably on everyone's mind, which is the fact that we are 14 days away from a national election. I think most of us in this room believe that children deserve the freedom to be themselves and to learn the truth of our past in order to understand our present and create a better future. However, what we see across the country is a disturbing trend of policies and narratives at work. We're seeing book bans, we're seeing eroding child labor laws, we're seeing attempts to strip the rights of trans children, attempts to erase our history. These are attacks on children that take many forms, but all of them are harming children's health, their mental health, their emotional well-being, their physical health, and in particular, opportunity for millions of children of color. Children of indigenous backgrounds, of immigrant backgrounds, Black, Latine, Asian American, mixed race children, LGBTQ children. If you listen to podcasts and you read articles, you can refer to these conversations and narratives as culture wars, but really, they're questions that speak to the core of who we really are. Who we are as community members, as parents, and as leaders. So each of you are leaders in your collective work for the well-being of our communities. So I'm gonna ask, what opportunities do you see to bring our communities together, even during this divisive time? Shimica, can I start with you?
Sure. Is this on? Okay, great. Well, first of all, Mayra, thank you for having me. It is really a pleasure and honor to be here on the panel with my fellow panelists and to see so many members of our community here celebrating TCP tonight. You know, I think this is a really powerful question and one in which you're right that if we continue to listen to the outside noise and not like the people that we work with every day, you can really fall into the trap of thinking there's only divisiveness. But I do think there are meaningful ways to have opportunities to really build with community, to really combat a lot of this. And part of that is really thinking about, you know, one of the strategies is building coalitions. You know, TCP has done this really well, where we're not only working with those who are most directly impacted, but thinking about across diverse sectors such as educators, health workers, faith communities, business leaders, to really get to a place of shared values and having that be what we're leading with and working towards. The other piece is really, I think, amplifying community voice. So if you listen to all of that noise, you don't actually hear the meaningful stories of resilience, of collaboration, of love that is happening in community solidarity. And having community members actually share their own lived experiences, not having us tell their stories, but them telling them stories themselves, because then it opens the door to really dismantle the stereotypes that are being perpetuated, to create opportunities and space for, to build trust in relationships, and I think openness that we need in community with each other, and to have that real solidarity. So continuing to educate our community so that they can advocate for themselves and be leaders, the leaders that they already are, and be able to have meaningful impact on policy change, and the narrative is really important. And so it ultimately just gets down to like fostering those connections and building that shared valued relationship.
Absolutely. I think part of the lifting up community voice and experience is recognizing the shared struggle that many communities experience, whether it is marginalization or discrimination. And one of the things that we deeply believe at TCP is that in order to advance child health and well-being, dismantling systemic racism is core to the work that we're doing. So much of child health inequities have roots in the systemic racism and discrimination that's hindered opportunity for so many. But if you think about what we're seeing across this country, it's a pretty scary time. There are dedicated attacks to race-specific initiatives that we know are necessary to address maternal health inequities or to address disproportionate impacts of disease on children of color. You even see it in a progressive state like California when you have lawsuits against the Abundant Birth Project, or here in LA against the Black Student Achievement Plan. So Virginia, I'm gonna head over to you. No pressure, but even within this context and this anti-DEI climate, how do we focus on community? How do we uplift those narratives and push back on what we know is happening across the country?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ayukui, Nekna, Virginia Hedrick. When I think about the original question of what brings us together, I want to echo Shimica's comments on what brings us together is shared values. In Indigenous communities, we have long understood the importance of centering children and centering the next generation, and also a deep understanding that what we do today will have impacts for 7 generations forward. And I know that we're not the only community that holds this value. I think there are many communities across race, across community that also hold this same value. So I think I would start with that. As it relates to what do we do? I think the history of the United States is one founded on stolen land, right? Stolen land, stolen women, stolen babies, genocide. And then removal and displacement of people here to this land in many ways. And that continues to happen. And the only way to heal from that, the only way to move forward from that is to have those same targeted intentionality around healing. So when we think around, there's big conversations around reparations, there's big conversations around truth and healing and reconciliation, and there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of pushback and a lot of folks watching to see what California will do. We have to situate that in the historical context that we also faced intentional policies meant to harm our people across communities. California is home to an internment camp in the Owens Valley, and we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about what happened in Bishop and who was placed there and who was stolen from LA and taken to the Valley and then buried there. We have a dark history to talk about, and as much as we want to celebrate our tremendous movement forward, I think as we think about reparations, as we think about truth and healing, we have to tell the truth. We have to account for history in a way that is one of both sides of telling the story. And we have to start infusing resources in education, in access to healthcare, in a culturally competent way. Just this last week, CMS approved California's efforts to have traditional healing and natural helpers as a billable under our state Medicaid. And as much as we have to celebrate that win, it's like, what next? How do we expand that access? How do we make sure children have access to these kinds of healing supports? So I don't want to take all the time on the stage, but those are the types of things I think about when we think about what are the things we can do and where do we find value alignment.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to talk about, these protective factors that are so important to culture. But before we go there, I want to take a moment of personal privilege and say, I'm a relatively new mom. My baby's 3. She's perfection, as Shimica knows. I'm going to say, in talking to parents and meeting parents and caregivers, parenting is this very complex task, even without the difficulty of the political narratives, the difficulty of the economic challenges. Just being a parent is hard work. And at the same time, I'm a child advocate, I'm an educated woman, I have resources. I feel like I can look up every single possible resource, and I'm supposed to know exactly what I'm supposed to do to be a good parent. It's a little overwhelming and daunting. For those of you that have not seen, the US Surgeon General put out a report called Parents Under Pressure, talking about the mental health crisis facing parents today. And you think about this challenge of parenting at every part of the economic spectrum and racial continuum is hard. It's hard. So Priscilla, I'm gonna hand over to you a little bit about this question of what responsibility do we have to support parents, recognizing the varying degrees of support that might be necessary, but also going back to Virginia's comments, how do we rethink cultural norms around parenting and how we value parenting? The work of raising a child, it's work, no less valuable than work in a paid job, but definitely less value when it comes to society's consideration. So talk to us about your vision for how we as a society can better support parents and caregivers and therefore the well-being of our children.
Thanks for that question, Mayra. I absolutely love that our Surgeon General came out with a framework that's really focusing on supporting our parents and caregivers. I'm also a mom. I think all of us are. And have also had other caretaking responsibilities. And it has simultaneously been the most joyful and the most isolating experience where I have felt vulnerable in the isolation and in so many other ways. One of the things that I love that I saw from that report was the Surgeon General talks about creating a culture of care for caretakers and parents to thrive. And I think that's really embedded in the vision that we're all trying to promote here. Creating a community of care, creating systems of care really means centering families, centering the cultural beliefs and supporting them in those ways, building and promoting policies that allow for these activities and these support systems to be in place. California was the first state to have a paid family leave law. I think it just hit the 20-year anniversary, which is incredible and sets, again, we are a role model for other states in what we do. At the same time, I will venture out and guess that we all do this work because we are personally connected to it, right? And so, as a parent, as a caretaker for older adults as well, there is a lot of mental health challenges, right? And I love what you talked about, Virginia, in terms of the healing component. I thought I was healed. I went to therapy in my 20s, I thought I was healed, and then I became a mom and realized there's a lot of healing I hadn't done for myself, right? A lot of generational trauma, just a lot of things that I needed to work through, and I kept going back to, we keep thinking about the common kind of phrase is, hurt people, and so the goal is we want to heal ourselves because healed people heal people, right? And what is more beautiful and more forgiving and more of a gift than to try to do that for our children.
Absolutely. I appreciate the calling in of the responsibility we each have to process, to heal, to do the work, to show up better as parents, as caregivers, as community members, right? And it's a lot of work that entails, a lot of patience that entails as well. And I want to talk a little bit about how we appreciate the struggle that brought us to that position, right? Whether it's intergenerational trauma, the challenges of discrimination, our communities are resilient because they had to be. Our communities are incredible and strong and beautiful and are raising healthy, thriving children, right? They really are. We've been able to rise as a result of the incredible power of culture and love and community and those values that we're rooted in. At the Children's Partnership, we're working on a brief that really highlights protective factors, right? And how it is that these protective factors are able to support the well-being of our children. And more importantly, how do we value those factors in our systems, in our programs, to give strength and value to the leadership of our communities? So much of the work to decolonize, to truly recognize the wisdom and leadership of community members, Shimica, to your opening comments, is to center on those strengths. So what more can we do to focus on the assets of communities of color? What more can we do to uplift those protective factors and hold policymakers and program implementers accountable to those commitments? Any one of you can answer that.
I'll start. I mean, I think Betty made a comment earlier that those closest to the problem are closest to the answer, and I think that couldn't be more true. It's going to community and being prepared for an answer you weren't expecting. So recently, I also serve on the board of directors for the California Wellness Foundation. I'm not here in that capacity tonight, but we were having a conversation about what does healing look like in Indian country and what are the things we need when we think about health and wellness. And what community came back with was support our language classes, support our basket making classes. And we're pairing that up against that American Indian children, our second leading cause of death is suicide. Our second leading cause of death is suicide. So there are many interventions you could throw at a community to address suicide. And communities are asking for language. They're asking for basket making. They're asking for investments in rebuilding traditional ceremonial places. And that might not be what the grant is. That might not be what the funding structure is for, right? So it's pushing back on, if you're gonna ask communities, what does it take to heal? Be prepared for an answer that you weren't expecting. Right? Ask those communities, what is it? What is it? And be willing to meet that, to take that answer, and to be humbled by it. I'm humbled every day by the work that we do in community, and we can't assume that we have all the answers, and every community is gonna be different, and in some ways our communities are gonna be the same. We're gonna be asking for cultural classes. We're gonna be asking for community events across the board. And so that's what I think it is. I think it's shifting the paradigm on what the solutions are and starting to think creatively.
I would love to piggyback off of that and share a community example as well of where in, I think it was 2021, but during the pandemic, during a lot of the anti-Asian hate incidences, there was a incident in Ladera Ranch, which is in South Orange County. I live in Orange County, where there was a newly arrived immigrant Chinese family that had been continuously harassed every night, 7 nights a week for 5 months. And it wasn't until another neighbor noticed that there was something going on and had talked to him and asked him about what was happening, that they realized, the kids weren't sleeping, the parents weren't sleeping, all of these things. And what's great, so the neighbor set up a neighborhood watch, and they were in the driveway, and that was a wonderful way to at least deter some of what was happening. But it wasn't until the community decided they wanted to have a celebration. And it just happened to be that when some of us started to find out what was going on, another neighbor of theirs who happened to be a friend of mine, a South Asian friend of mine, reached out to me and asked, is there something we can do as a neighborhood to really welcome this family? And they threw a lantern festival in the middle of Ladera Ranch. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but it's not traditionally a part of the county that has lantern festivals. There was a dragon dance, people. I was part of the organizing effort, and what was so beautiful about it was I remember arriving at the park, and the neighbors, the whole entire neighborhood had decked out their decks, their front porches with lanterns. There were people milling around, there were food trucks there, people were bringing in their lawn chairs, people just really celebrating and welcoming, and creating a safe space for that community. And for me, that really hit home because in that moment, I realized I had actually experienced something like this as a child, but my parents, they did not describe it as, racial discrimination and, racially motivated property damage, things like that was happening to our home. Their response was to kind of shut it down, but the better response is for the community to come together and really celebrate and, in a culturally appropriate way, this family, and to show them that they belong.
No, it's so beautiful. I think the thing that comes to mind too when you ask about decolonizing our systems is, as Virginia and Priscilla just gave such beautiful examples of honoring cultural wisdom and reimagining our systems in one that we are showing and relying on values of love, dignity, and respect of families, of individuals, and humans, which we don't do in our current systems, whether they're the health system, the education system, all the systems that we're working towards changing. And so part of it is also thinking about what do we need to be doing policy-wise to actually really show that we value families, that we value children for 7 generations, because currently we don't do that, or we do that in a very piecemeal way. And so that's what I'm constantly thinking about is how do we need to reimagine these systems and put those policies in place so that they are immune to the political winds and the divisiveness that you said as much as we possibly can, not one budget cycle after another budget cycle, but really shifting them, because right now they aren't family friendly. It's very hard to get paid we have parental leave in California, but we are not where we need to be, whether it's childcare or any of the other systems that really show that we value children and families in this country and in this state.
I'm going to pick up on that question, Shimica, because I think part of the core work of TCP is to make public programs work better for families. And most recently, we've seen just how inaccessible those public programs can be, whether it's onerous paperwork or language barriers, or frankly, what we hear a lot from community is the lack of dignity that people experience walking through the doors of a county. Not all counties, but I'm just saying, like walking through the doors of the county. And most recently, we went through the ending of the public health emergency, and we had many families having to re-enroll in the Medi-Cal program. And we've lost hundreds of thousands of kids to the fact that we have these onerous requirements, right? 374,000 children have lost it. Technically, according to the government, the public health emergency has ended. But when we talk to families, it's an emergency every day. Not being able to pay your rent, not being able to put food on the table, worried that you can't pay your bill when you go to the doctor, those are emergencies. So when we think about our public programs and the responsibility we have to make them work better, what lessons can you share from progress that's been made to give us some hope on the promise of our protective factors and valuing culture? No pressure, Shimica.
I have an answer. And I don't mean to be offensive in any way, so hopefully this hits in the right place for you all. We live in a country that it's an emergency and it's a crisis if white people might die. That's just the truth. Communities of color have been in an opioid crisis for decades. We've been dying of opioid overdoses. It became a crisis when middle-class white kids started ODing. Now we're in a crisis. It's a millions and millions of dollars investment because we're in an opioid crisis. The pandemic, pretty uncomfortable, because everyone was like, we're all in this storm together. Some of us don't even have a boat. We're not in the same storm. We're not weathering the same storm. We already didn't have great food access. We were already experiencing high rates of domestic violence. We were already not had internet in our homes. But suddenly, when it became an issue that like, hey, maybe some folks are gonna be put out of the way by this, we should declare this an emergency because, and again, like white people might die. This is an emergency. Let's throw everything at this that we can. When communities of color, we've been experiencing this like for decades, right? For decades. So suddenly we got access to things like we couldn't be evicted. We could stay in our homes. That our children would be guaranteed food, right? And they could just walk to the school and pick it up if school was closed. When for decades we've been saying, hey, summers and winter breaks are pretty tough on some of our families. These are hard times. Like, how are we supposed to be celebrating a holiday when our kids aren't being fed for 2.5 weeks, right? So, like, these were problems we were already experiencing, but suddenly it was like everybody gets food. Everybody gets food, everybody gets internet, folks get cell phones, you can't kick them out of their home. And also, like, the opioid crisis is happening at the same time, and also, like, gun violence is happening at the same time. So, like, in communities of color, it was like, this is just one crisis. This is just one crisis we're experiencing all at the same time. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think there was a few years there where our children were being hit with a number of things. American Indian children suffered the greatest loss of parent providers through the pandemic. Among racial categories, we lost the most of our care providers. And that wasn't just mothers and fathers. I'm a mother of 5 children. 2 of them come to me by way of foster care, and they're my nieces. So I understand this system very well, that care providing and being a parent in communities of color looks differently. Sometimes we birth our children, and sometimes they come to us in a different way. And the fact that that's even a conversation on the national platform is so disgusting, right? Like, I cannot believe we're having to have these discussions over and over again in this country. So I know I didn't answer your question directly, but I just, like, that's the reaction I get every time we talk about the pandemic is like, we are still in crisis, we were in crisis before, and we could use all of those things again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do think that there's something to be said about the work that we have been able to do in partnership. And Shimica, I have to say, in response to Virginia's comments, I want to lift up your leadership and the work that you did to establish Hope Accounts, and in particular, center the experiences of kids that have disproportionately been affected by pandemic and the killing of our parents and caregivers. And would love for you to talk about that and uplift that example.
Thank you. I feel like I can't really, I mean, Virginia said it all. I mean, part of the goal with Hope Accounts for just to share with those is during the pandemic, as Virginia was saying, we were often, just watching the numbers tick on CNN about how many people were dying, so many people were losing family members in our community. We probably all had lost family members. And we were yet not really talking about the children, right? Like, that was we were having conversations. No one's talking about the children that are being impacted by these multi-generational households that are losing, grandmas and aunties and uncles who are taking care of them. And so what can we do about it? And we had already been looking at a public policy solution called baby bonds as a way to think about transformational change and how to close the racial and economic wealth gaps in California. And it's a concept that was utilized in the UK, where they had child trust accounts where when every baby was born, they put money in an account, and it stayed there and amortized for 18 years, so that when they became 18 years old, they had sort of a nest egg to start life out with. And so, so we really pushed for, like, this is the moment to think about these babies who are not going to have that safety net in the same way that they might have had if they had, their caregivers around. And so, thankfully, the state of California put aside $100 million in a trust account for children who lost a parent or primary caregiver to COVID, and children who've been in foster care for over 18 months. And so the program is launching in 2025, and those children who've reached 18 will have $4,500 to utilize towards their transition into adulthood. And we want to continue to grow the program to reach all babies born on Medi-Cal, because we really do see it as a pathway But most importantly, Indigenous children will actually have access to those accounts too, which was really important to us.
So for those of you that didn't know about Hope Accounts, now you do. It's half the battle is actually getting the word out to families to enroll. So 2025, spread the word to your community that those are going to be available to them. And I know we're getting close to time, and I want to before I ask you your final closing comments, one of the things that we've talked about, each of you have talked about the importance of community. Someone that I read a lot about and try to follow their teachings is the great Audre Lorde. And Audre Lorde said, "Without community, there is no liberation." And there's a reason why you all were invited to be part of this panel. Each of us are women of color. We're leading nonprofits, and the work is really hard. And I know that I wouldn't be standing up here 9 years into this position without the ability to text you, have lunch with you, ask you questions. I am a stronger leader, a more capable leader, because of the executive directors in my life that have helped me show up every day. Many of you are here today. There's Crystal and Erica and all kinds, Drew. And I want you to take a moment to reflect on your leadership role and how you show up every day, and what do you need to stay in this work? What do you need from your community to continue the badass advocacy that you do? Because we're not done yet.
I'm thinking about, right now with that question, when my first job after law school, I worked for a reproductive justice organization. So I really attribute my policy analysis, my political leanings towards the reproductive justice framework, which was founded and built by Black women. But what I learned from them was that stories matter, and my story in particular mattered. I did not grow up in a space where we told our personal stories, or we shared what was happening and what we learned from it. And so it took me a while to get there. But I think what I try to instill in the policy and advocacy work I do now, which is mostly working with direct service providers who are, as we know, at the front lines of the daily crises that our families are experiencing, is that our stories are worthy. A lot of us feel like our stories are not worthy, that it's not worth telling, but that is, or that we don't have the data, but the stories are the data. And I think that is what I think is so important. We all have something to share, we all have something to contribute, and there are so many similarities in the communities and families we work with.
I'll give Virginia the last word. So, I think I love Audre Lorde, first of all. So for me, it just really reminds me that collaboration isn't like a strategy, but like really a necessity, because none of us do any of this work alone. And really, we talked about the power of partnerships when we started, like we cannot do it by ourselves, and nor should we, because we are collective people and we should be in this together. And so for me, it's really about knowing that so many other folks are out there each and every day doing this really hard work of trying to change our society and have a place where our children can grow and thrive, and that people actually really value each and every child, even if it's not their own child, because we're not in a society where we actually do that in a way. And so, and to really, pass the mic to the communities who are doing the work, the leaders, the unsung heroes that we all know in the churches and everywhere else. That's what keeps me going, because what I'm doing is nowhere near as hard as what those folks are doing every day.
Yeah, you said something earlier that our communities are really resilient, and I think that's not fair. We shouldn't have to be so resilient, and we're really tired of being resilient. Like, you can only stretch a rubber band so many times before it just breaks, and we've been experiencing that across communities. So when I think about like what do I need, I think it's allyship. It's allyship from everyone in the room, and the allyship that I've experienced with TCP. And Kristen, the tribute to you earlier, how many Zoom calls have we been on where, we're seeing each other across the room advocating for really similar things and being able to lift other communities' needs, sometimes put them before our community needs because there's an emerging need there that needs to be met immediately. Having that sense of allyship across organizations, across community. The work that we do at Sikui doesn't have a specific portfolio around children, and TCP lifts that work for us and has always been very clear to include American Indian Alaska Native children in your policy portfolio. And so that's what I need. It's what I continue to need. And I think, I want to just take a moment to thank TCP for your legacy of work and for making sure that our community's in the room even when we're not. Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you.
Okay, well, technically we're wrapping up, but we always do this at the end of each of our sessions. The speaker series that we've had this last year is focused on For Our Children's Future. So when you think about what we can together do for our children's future, what does it look like? What do you want the people in this room to walk away with? Just a few words of that so that we can wrap up and make sure people can continue to celebrate the community that we are here with tonight, because we're all in this together. So, for our children's future, what are we walking away with?
I keep going first, but I don't mean to. I dream a world where our children's health is not politically determined, which is a term I just learned last week, the political determinants of health, and I can't get it out of my head. I can't get it out of my head in this political climate that we're in, that our health is politically determined. And I dream a world where that's not the case, where truly our children all have equitable access to health and equitable access to thrive. And I think everyone in this room, as I've read your name tags and remember your faces, plays a really critical role in that, in whatever sphere of the world you work, that we all carry that with us. What are we doing to change the political determinants of health?
For me, it's really about abundance. We have such a scarcity mindset in this country, and so to have a place where children can experience abundance in whatever ways that it feels for them, and then not experience racism, sexism, classism, all the divisive things that we started this conversation talking about.
And for me, I think about the power of being seen and the power of being heard and how transformative that can be when you are, especially when you're part of a community that is often overlooked or misunderstood. So that is the future that I hope for my kids, all our kids.
Thank you so much. With abundance, with the politics and the power of our communities, with the stories that we tell, we're in good hands in the partnership that we have, and we value you, and we thank you for being a part of it with us. So thank you. Please give our panel a round of applause. And I'd like to invite board member James Perez to the stage.
Let's give our panelists another hand. Hello, everyone. My name is James Perez. I serve on the TCP board. And on behalf of the board, I just want to give a few thank yous before we all depart. First, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists for their inspiring words and conversation. And I'm sure each of us are going to be thinking about your words over the next days and weeks. Thank you to our host, the Japanese American National Museum. Thank you to Aisha, the Aisha Life, for the delicious food and wine and drinks. Thank you so much. To the talented youth who I don't see anymore, but as a lifelong jazz fan, they were amazing. Thank you to the Harmony Project. And our wonderful photographer, Los Photos. And our amazing, incredible event planner, Aurora Alana, for bringing us all together today. Thank you so much. Thank you, obviously, so much to Mayra for her leadership and over these last 9 years. Thank you so much, Mayra. Thank you to the entire TCP team for your ongoing dedication and work. And finally, thank you to everyone who's here today. Who took the picture outside? All of us, right? Yeah. Okay, so whoever took the picture outside, please pick up the QR code on your table. Take a picture of that, and it will take you to our website. And I hope that you can find it within your heart to continue to support TCP by making a donation of any size. So if you can make that donation so we can continue our shared work for hopefully another 30 years, we'll really appreciate it. It's a tax-deductible donation, by the way. Thank you again, and have a good night.